Hi, I'm Anna Taborska, and I'm going to read Marked from my micro collection Shadowcats, published by Black Shuck Books. Marked. Thou art the great cat, the avenger of the gods, and the judge of words, and the president of the sovereign chiefs, and the governor of the holy circle. That's part of an inscription from a tomb in the Valley of the Kings. It had been a hard but satisfying day. The girl had fought valiantly for her life, particularly given her slight build and tender age, and the very process of bagging up her body and weighing it down with stones before depositing it into just the right spot in the canal had been physically draining. The man took a sip of his pint and gazed absent-mindedly at the cat with the unusual markings that had been his constant drinking companion ever since he'd started frequenting the organ grinder. The cat's coat was the light sandy brown of the desert at dusk, with a cream throat and belly, narrow bands of dark fur around its legs and black-tipped tail, and rings of white fur around its eyes. The eyes themselves were the colour of sun-washed savannah, and long pale hairs sprouted on the insides of its delicately tufted orangey-brown ears. Its whiskers were long and white, its nose a salmon pink, and a dark stripe round the length of its back. The man's thoughts turned from the cat back to the day's events, and he smiled to himself. He'd first chosen the girl, or marked her, as he liked to think of it, a month earlier. After that it was simply a matter of following her home, observing her movements, working out her daily routine, and picking the best time and place to make his move. As the time approached, the waiting, the watching, the anticipation had become almost unbearable, but in the end worth every minute, as it always was. The profound sense of calm he now felt would last for a couple of weeks, perhaps more, given the souvenir that he'd kept, a heart-shaped locket containing a photo of the smiling faces of the girl and her best friend. He'd keep the little silver-plated pendant in his secret place and could take it out whenever he wanted to relive the day's events. When the burning need took a hold of him again, the whole process would begin anew, and thanks to the photo in the locket, he already had his next mark. A nudge against his calf brought the man out of his reverie. He looked down at the cat, which was up to its usual trick of weaving between his legs, rubbing its flanks against his calves, but never allowing itself to be stroked. When it was done, it sat close by, staring intently up at him. The two locked eyes for a long moment. The man finished his pint and was about to get up when the animal leapt on his lap, turned around as though it were about to lie down for a snooze, rubbing itself against the man's chest as it did so, and then was gone, jumping down before the man could react, and disappearing into the darkness by the side of the bar. Officers from the Metropolitan Police Service's Homicide and Major Crime Command had been watching the man for a while. The CCTV cameras near the school of the teenage victim had captured him several times walking on the opposite side of the road. There was no crime against walking in the street, but when the broken body of the girl was eventually found by police divers, the officer in charge of the investigation decided to take a chance and pay a visit to the man's West London home, along with his sergeant. "Do you have any pets, sir?" asked Detective Chief Inspector Harrison, surreptitiously placing in his pocket the animal hair he'd spotted clinging to a jacket hanging over the back of a chair in the man's sitting room. "No." The man was genuinely surprised. "No, I don't. Why do you ask?" "No reason, sir. I just noticed some animal hair on your jacket there." "Ah, I see." The man smiled, relaxing into the sofa. "It must be from the cat from the pub. It's all over me whenever I go in." DCI Harrison smiled and nodded. Reassured that there was nothing sinister behind the question, the man ventured a little joke. "Cats can tell who's good and who's bad, you know, Chief Inspector, so I must be a very good man. But seriously, I'm afraid I really can't help you. I hope you catch who did it, though. You mentioned a pub. DCI Harrison wasn't going to let it go. One of the few surviving pieces of DNA evidence, given the state of decomposition of the girl's body after weeks in a bag in a canal, were a couple of sandy-coloured cat hairs that had been removed from the girl's hair and from the inside of the bag. And neither the girl's family nor apparently anyone she knew owned a cat with matching fur. The man paused for a moment, weighing up his options. He couldn't pretend that he'd forgotten the name of the pub, because he'd already let the cat out of the bag, as it were, by indicating that he'd been there more than once. If he gave the name of another pub and the police checked it out, they wouldn't find a cat in it, and they'd wonder why he'd lied. If he gave them the right name, what was the worst that could happen? There was nothing linking any of the girls to the pub, and the police would see that he wasn't lying. "The organ grinder," he finally said, adding casually in a bid to appear helpful. "It's just the other side of Southfield Green. Kind of a spooky old place, but quiet enough of an evening." While waiting for the lab results to come in, DCI Harrison decided to go for a pint at the organ grinder. He was surprised he'd never come across the pub before. Then again, who'd want to drink in a pub painted entirely black on the exterior, and with lighting that hardly penetrated the creeping shadows inside? "How can I help you?" The tired, sad-looking woman at the bar gazed at DCI Harrison with little enthusiasm. "I'm DCI Harrison with the Metropolitan Police. I'd be grateful if you could take a look at this photo and tell me if you've seen this man before." He held out a photo of the man he'd recently visited. "Yes," the woman behind the bar replied. "I first noticed him a few months ago, and since then he's become something of a regular. Has something happened to him?" "Just routine questions, madam," said Harrison. "You must have a lot of customers. How come you remember him so well?" "It's a funny thing. There's a cat that hangs around the pub. I feed it sometimes, but it never lets me get anywhere near it, or anybody else for that matter, except for that man. Whenever he comes in, the cat's all over him." "You mean he's the only one that can stroke it?" "Not exactly. I mean, it follows him around everywhere, pesters him, even jumps on him, but I don't think he's ever actually managed to stroke it." As DCI Harrison left the organ grinder, he thought he caught sight of a pair of green-flecked amber eyes glowing in the shadows under one of the tables, but when he looked closer, they were gone. "Felis sylvestris libica. It's your African wildcat again." The forensics specialist looked distinctly pleased with himself. "This time I was prepared." The first time Harrison had brought him a couple of animal hairs recovered from the body of the murdered girl. He'd had to consult with an American colleague and do a global database search, as the feline they came from didn't match anything native to Britain. A search of public and private zoos hadn't unearthed any missing stock, and there was no such animal listed on any veterinary database either. "Thanks." DCI Harrison headed swiftly for the door, convinced now that the man marked by the cat hair was the sick bastard he was after. Now he'd have to do everything by the book, get a search warrant, Miranda the man, help the Crown prosecutor build a strong case. "Detective Chief Inspector," the forensics expert stopped Harrison for a moment. "You caught me by surprise last time, so I did a little reading. Most of our moggies are descended from the African wildcat, you know. But your cat is the real deal. They still live wild in the Africa and the Middle East. In the past, some of them chose to live with people because they could prey on rodents attracted by grain stores. They've been known to kill snakes and scorpions, so the ancient Egyptians believed they could vanquish evil." A year had passed since the successful prosecution and incarceration of the girl's killer. The cat with fur the colour of the desert, dubbed Monster by the barwoman, in revenge for the fact that it took the food she offered but refused to come anywhere near her, continued to skulk around the organ grinder, startling the occasional punter with its silent footfall and soul-penetrating stare. It was a surprisingly warm day in early March, when rays of the afternoon sun had somehow managed to invade the less gloomy corners of the organ grinder, and a small group of delivery boys from the local pizza parlour, who had just finished their shift, were playing a round of pool on the newly installed table. The cat, which had been hiding in some spot of the pub known only to itself, appeared suddenly by the entrance door, ears alert and quivering from whiskers to tail. A moment later the door opened and a tall, attractive brunette, well-dressed and wearing large sunglasses, strode confidently in. Her sights were set on one of the young men playing pool. She'd singled him out for her own special brand of cat and mouse, and she certainly wouldn't be assuming the role of mus musculus. She'd buy herself a drink and watch him for a while from a table that remained bathed in darkness despite the brightness of the day. But first she had to shake the strange-looking cat that was rubbing itself against her legs and leaving pale-coloured hairs all over her black stockings. That was marked, and there'll be more about the exploits of Monster the Cat in a novel I've started writing called Tales from the Organ Grinder. Thanks for listening.